You've just made a kill, a big one. A monkey, maybe, or a small deer, whatever the hunt turned up after hours of tracking through thick forest. And as you stand over it, you notice something. A small shape, still alive, clinging to the body of the animal you just killed. A baby. Eyes barely open, too young to survive alone, too helpless to run. Every logical part of your brain tells you this is just more food, another meal, another resource in a landscape where resources are never guaranteed. And yet, across cultures, across continents, across thousands of years of human history, the same thing happens. You pick it up, you take it back to camp, and you start taking care of it. Why? What was actually going on when your ancestors reached down and picked up that animal instead of leaving it behind? The answer turns out to be several things at once, layered on top of each other in ways that are genuinely hard to separate. And the more you pull at any one of them, the stranger and more fascinating the whole picture becomes. Start with what researchers who study modern hunter-gatherer societies actually observed in the field, because this is where it gets immediately shocking. The Awa people of the eastern Amazon in Brazil, one of only 2 truly nomadic hunter-gatherer tribes left in the country, have a practice that stops most people cold the first time they hear it. When Awa hunters kill an adult female monkey, they search for any infant still dependent on its mother. If they find one, they bring it back to camp. And then Awa women breastfeed it, not as a curiosity, not as a temporary measure, as a genuine extension of the care they give their own children. This is not an isolated practice. It has been documented across dozens of hunter-gatherer groups around the world, in South America, Southeast Asia, Africa, and the Pacific Islands. Women nursing orphaned animals alongside their own infants. The same care, the same attention, the same instinct applied in 2 directions at once. Now, before you dismiss this as a quirk of one particular group, consider the scale of what has been documented. Anthropologist John Bradshaw, in his research into the history of human-animal bonding, found that a remarkable number of hunter-gatherer and small-scale societies across the 19th and 20th centuries kept wild animals as something researchers can only describe as pets, not for work. Not as food animals being fattened, something more complicated than either of those things. Baby tapirs, baby deer, baby birds, baby pigs, small predators. Animals that, by any strict survival logic, had no obvious use in a nomadic camp that needed to travel light and move fast. And yet, there they were, kept, fed, and cared for anyway, so why? The simplest explanation, the one that sounds the most rational, is that it was about future food. You rescue the baby animal, raise it until it's big enough to eat, and then you eat it. And this certainly happened sometimes. It was a kind of living food storage in a world that had no refrigerators and no guarantee the next hunt would go well. A young animal being raised in camp was a backup plan. Insurance against the seasons when prey was scarce and hunger was real and immediate. That explanation falls apart the moment you look closely at what actually happened, because animals raised in camp from infancy almost never got eaten. Not in the communities where this practice has been observed most carefully. What happened instead is that a bond formed. A genuine, measurable, behaviorally obvious bond between the human caregiver and the young animal, something that made killing it later genuinely difficult in a way that killing a wild-caught adult animal was not. Researchers studying this pattern noted that the longer a young animal spent in close contact with humans, the harder it became for those humans to treat it as food rather than as something more like a member of the group. Food storage theory doesn't survive contact with the emotional reality of what actually happened between humans and the animals they raised, which brings up something much more interesting and much harder to explain. Several anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer relationships with animals have proposed that rescuing and raising baby animals served a psychological and social function that had nothing to do with food at all. Caring for an orphaned baby animal may represent atonement, a way of balancing the moral ledger after the kill that created the orphan in the first place. The Huaorani people of Ecuador provide one of the clearest documented examples of this. When they hunt adult monkeys using blowguns and poison-tipped darts, they go out of their way to attribute the animal's death not to themselves but to the plant from which the poison was extracted, as if to place moral distance between the hunter and the act of killing. And then, after killing a female monkey, they make every effort to capture an infant still clinging to its mother. They take the baby home, they raise it. The rescue becomes part of the ritual of the hunt itself, a way of giving something back to the creature whose life was just taken. This is not a small or incidental detail. It points toward something deep and genuinely surprising about how ancient humans understood their relationship with the animals around them. The idea that you owe something to the animal you killed, that the debt can be partially repaid by caring for its young, requires a moral framework far more complex than pure survival thinking. It requires empathy. It requires the ability to imagine the animal's experience as something that matters. And it suggests that your ancestors, living in conditions of genuine hardship where food was never guaranteed, were not simply brutal, efficient killers moving through the landscape and consuming everything available. They were carrying a weight, a moral awareness of what hunting cost, and they were finding ways to answer that cost, however partially, however symbolically, through acts of care. There is another dimension to this that almost nobody discusses, and it may be the most practically important one of all. Baby animals raised from infancy in human camps provided something that could not be obtained any other way in that era: intelligence about the species. If you want to understand how a particular animal moves, what it eats, how it reacts to threats, how it behaves at different times of day, and in different kinds of weather, the single most efficient way to gather that information is to live with one from birth. A young monkey raised in your camp teaches you things about monkeys that years of hunting them from a distance never could. A baby deer raised alongside you tells you exactly how deer think, what frightens them, how they signal danger to each other, what they do just before they bolt. This knowledge was directly transferable to hunting. Every animal raised in the group was also, in a very real sense, a research subject that made the whole group better hunters of that species. And then there is the possibility that seems strangest until you realize it is the most documented. Some of those baby animals simply became companions, not tools, not food, not research. Just animals that lived with people, were cared for by people, and over enough time changed because of it. The first domesticated dogs almost certainly began exactly this way, not as a deliberate breeding program, but as individual wolf pups pulled from the wild and raised in human company, again and again across generations until the line between wild animal and something new entirely slowly disappeared. What this entire story reveals, when you step back and look at all of it together, is that ancient humans had a relationship with the animal world that was layered, emotionally complex, and completely different from the clean utilitarian picture people carry in their heads. They killed animals, they ate them, and they also picked up their babies and nursed them and talked to them and grieved when they died. Not despite the killing, sometimes because of it. The empathy and the necessity existed side by side, tangled together in ways that are uncomfortable to think about precisely because they don't resolve neatly into a simple story. A hunter who kills a mother monkey and then carries her infant back to camp and feeds it for months is not behaving irrationally. He is behaving in a deeply, specifically human way. He is holding two contradictory truths at the same time and refusing to let either one of them go. And somewhere in that tangle, quietly, without any plan, something enormous started. Every time a baby animal was pulled from the wild and raised in a human camp, it spent its most formative period surrounded by humans rather than by its own kind. It learned human sounds and human rhythms and human smells. It became, if not tame exactly, then at least something less wild than its parents had been. And the individuals of that species who were least frightened by humans, who recovered from stress faster, who sought out human proximity rather than fleeing it, were the ones that survived longest in that environment. Across enough generations, enough rescues, enough camps, enough individual decisions to pick up the baby instead of leaving it behind, entire species began to change. Not because anyone planned it, because the act of rescue, repeated across millennia, quietly did what no deliberate breeding program could have done in the same time frame. It created the conditions for domestication without anyone ever intending to domesticate anything. The first dogs almost certainly began exactly this way. Individual wolf pups, raised in human company, bonding with their caregivers, growing into adults that were neither fully wild nor anything like what we'd recognize as a modern dog, but something new, something in between, something that could hunt with you and sleep beside you and warn you in the dark. A 32,000-year-old grave found by Belgian scientist Mietje Germonpré contained a human and a dog buried together, evidence of a bond already so significant it warranted shared burial. That bond didn't appear out of nowhere. It was the accumulated result of countless individual moments, each one beginning the same way, with someone bending down over something small and frightened and motherless, and deciding it was worth keeping alive. It started with rescue, and it changed the world. What do you think was the real reason behind it? Let me know in the comments. See you soon.